Hello my friends, welcome to another edition of A Parson's Progress. But there hasn't really been any progress to speak of, so I've got nothing to report, sadly. Blowy day, hasn't rained, so it's been nice and bright, but a lot of wind coming through the Hermitage. I've done nothing. I spent a good deal of time on hold to various banks because they insist on sending things to my other address, even though I keep telling them not to. So I did that, a bit of admin, and I also did some formatting of my novel, which I'm going to read another chapter today. It's come round quick, this one, and a very long chapter, this, and quite a pivotal chapter. It's a good chapter, I think. I haven't read it through, so I might make lots of verbal mistakes in my narration, as it were. Well, I did go onto the Barnes & Noble site today for self-publishing, because you can do personal editions. Might be worth knocking one out. And they do dust covers and hard jackets and all the rest of it. So if Richard's watching, look up Barnes & Noble if you want a book with a dust cover, as I think you were saying on your video this morning, which I enjoyed with a pipe. Anyway, let's see if we can find my novel. Having said all that, when I sit here, I get a weird sort of light which bounces off these glasses, which doesn't make reading easy at all. Excuse the noise on the mic. These things can't be helped. Right, let's have a look. Where are we? Got to get in first. I shall mute the sound. Right. Not that I'm connected to the internet or anything, but you just don't know, do you, with the... Right, I think I'm okay. Yeah, chapter 13 we're on now. If you remember, John Reith was invited to the Christmas drinks, and he was worried he couldn't find his suit, and then he did find his suit finally, but there was a ruddy great hole in it from the moths. But anyway, he was determined to go to the drinks party at Thornbury Towers. I know this reading's come around pretty quick, but, you know, why not? I mean, there are so many chapters. As I say, a lot of people are very encouraging of the novel. It's not, they never get many views. Maybe they will when it becomes a BBC serialised drama on Sunday evenings. It was very nice. Some lads were riding past on their bicycles the other day, because sometimes it's an odd kind of isolated existence here, and you sometimes wonder why you bother with all this. And it was rather nice. I don't know who the lads were. There were I was just going back into the caravan, having checked on the little pond, and it was one of those blisteringly hot days that we've just had, and 3 cyclists went past. No idea who they were. They're probably watching. Because suddenly out of the bushes, the tree line, came this, "We love you, Father John, we love you, we love your videos." And as they were just cycling past, they were just booming down the side of the hill. So I felt rather cheered by that. Complete strangers saying how they enjoyed the channel. So there we go. It's quite good, isn't it? I don't think I'm going to be able to solve this. I think they're just so scratched, my glasses. There's a lot of bloom on them. So do forgive any errors in my reading. Anyway, chapter 13, Hunter's Moon. Simon Jessup might have been every part the city gent. His working life in London consisted of well-cut suits and board meetings, but he was still a son of the Dale. Always happy to get out of London, he was never happier than when he was in the country. Today he was the guest gun on the Brandlesham shoot. His father normally would have shot that day, but Daphne was in need of moral support in the kitchen. It was the day of the Christmas drinks party. And although not involved in the actual production of the dainties herself, she was still stressed at paying host to the great and good of the county. Morgan was of no assistance either in the preparation of the canapes, but in simply standing idly by he produced a desired effect on his wife's nerves. She was steadied. The guns met at Brandtram House, where the early morning frost had turned slowly into mist, which in turn evaporated into a bright winter's day. That's the wind, by the way, rattling the windows. I thought it was somebody knocking on the door. There is no door to knock. Excuse that interruption. Evaporated into bright winter's day. In the shadow of a rank of tall elm trees, a number of glossy four-wheel drive vehicles sat side by side with the less shimmering Land Rovers. The guns alighted their carriages to an orchestra of rooks perched high above them, and wasted no time in retrieving their guns and assembling them, all the time enjoying the social chit-chat that country friends like to engage in. Major Fanshawe was in charge of the proceedings. He was regarded as a colourful character by personal largesse and his sense of dress. Today he turned out like a capercaillie. He stood before the party that morning like a cock, resplendent in +4s and a tweed tam o' shanter. He claimed Scottish heritage, but could produce no evidence that anyone could see, and when not chairing the shoot, still had time to ride out with the Fellside Blazers. However, game and a single malt were his passion, and this was corroborated by his face. He sported a hue that only whisky and wind could produce. He was still a handsome man, despite his 60 years, with a full head of grey hair slicked back in good cavalry fashion. His finely chiselled features and good looks ensured that he did not go unnoticed by the mature ladies of the North Riding, nor their husbands. Many a married man had a good reason to feel nervous around Major Fanshawe. Despite having an eye for a finely turned ankle, Fanshawe never married and appeared to live entirely for country pursuits. He inhabited a small but beautifully appointed cottage down upon the riverside, with only his dogs and horse for company. The Major blew his horn and called the guns to attention. From deep within the pockets of his Norfolk jacket he produced a silver peg container. With great deliberation the guns drew their lots. Simon drew peg 9, which suited him. It meant that on the first drive he would be positioned at the top of the Piggery steps. He knew the terrain well, and a pheasant pen was positioned not far from that peg. Not that there would be any pheasants in the pen. They had all been released earlier in the season. However, pheasants are creatures of habit, and they will have been used to seeking food there. There was no doubt about it. Some pegs were preferential to others. Although the country was the perfect antidote to the affairs of town, Simon could never quite let go of the reins. His steely-eyed determination and native talent for profit had ensured a successful career. He was in an especially buoyant mood today, for not only did he draw peg 9, his erstwhile city love was arriving in time for lunch. Strict instructions had been given to Emma by telephone to ensure their shooting hamper was in order, and that would be the last bite before tonight's drinks party. Country air always produced an exceptional appetite, and today would be no exception. Emma Floyd pulled up in her MGB Roadster in British Racing Green. She slid from the seat with a grace and stood up and stretched. She was tall and slim and turned out appropriately in a hacking jacket and snug corduroys. Her hair was blonde and full, and it was difficult for the retiring guns not to notice her. In many ways similar to Simon, he was a corporate man, she was a corporate woman. They both understood the industry and both enjoyed their independence. Neither could contemplate shared domesticity, but the chemistry that inflamed their weekends was undeniable. Jealousy never rose, as neither were possessive. They both walked out in town with other friends and knew better than to inquire too closely. Now, the morning was best part over, and, as Simon predicted, successful. The guns wearily made their way back to the bottom of the hill where they had left their vehicles. Lunch was ready. Patrick Jessup arrived at Home Farm in timely fashion. He stood in the kitchen whilst Lorna was upstairs deciding whether to wear her hair up or down. "Well, the rain's kept off," said Vera, pouring him a whisky. "Indeed, Vera, yes indeed. Just as well, really. Simon was out today with Lord Brandlesham." "Aye, keeps the birds down to wet," pitched in Alan Stroud, whilst adjusting his tie in front of the hallway mirror. The Alan and Vera were very fond of Patrick. They had watched Lorna as he grew up together. Vera was quietly impressed with the Morgan dynasty. She admired their impressive home and the dignity with which Daphne conducted her affairs within the community. Alan was more like his daughter, rather awkward in their company. He did have certain reservations about Patrick. He knew his daughter and he understood that she did require handling. Patrick, for his liking, never appeared quite man enough. He would be useless on the land and didn't have an eye for horseflesh. The prestigious antique shops in Montpellier Harrogate were more his bag. However, Patrick was no worse than some and better than many. Lorna descended the staircase. A vision of loveliness itself, a simple black cocktail dress with no more adornment than a twin set of pearls to frame her delicate yet athletic figure. She decided against wearing her hair up. After all, it was her crowning glory. Patrick noticed the pearls immediately. He had presented Lorna with them for her 30th birthday. Whatever his other faults, a lack of generosity was not one of them, although he viewed his magnanimity in the same way as an animal marks his territory. It displayed ownership and control. "Gorgeous as ever, darling," said Patrick, holding out her coat to her. "Oh, shut up, you crawler," she said stoutly with a thin smile, "and go and bring the car round." Patrick Jessup made off for the Porsche. "Yes, we all better wrap up. It's freezing out," said Vera, looking in the mirror, adjusting her scarf. "Now then, mother," said Alan, "your carriage awaits." Alan took his wife and escorted her out of Home Farm, not through the back porch as usual, but through the front door. The stone gargoyles looked down menacingly from the battlements of Thornbury Towers, watching carefully the steady procession of traffic converging upon the gravelled courtyard below. The Dales had disgorged its great and good severally in aged Bentleys, smart coupes and four-wheel drives. Daphne was in her element, suitably dressed in a silk blue taffeta dress, meeting and greeting. Morgan was on hand in the large foyer as guests arrived to welcome them, whilst Hattie relieved them of their coats. Simon was on hand, making sure everyone had a drink in their hand. "Morgan, my dear boy," effused the stout, tall gentleman with a handlebar moustache whilst extending his hand. The fullness of his stature eclipsed the guests behind him, who were keen to get out of the cold. "Good evening, Colonel," replied Morgan Jessup, shaking the Colonel's hand vigorously. "Hattie, Colonel and Mrs. Blenheim's coats, my dear. Lady Agnes, long time no see," Morgan continued, kissing the Colonel's wife lightly on the cheek. "Indeed, Morgan, indeed," Mrs. Blenheim replied absent-mindedly, looking around to see who else was there. She was statuesque, despite her years, and exuded a natural confidence born from centuries of breeding. "And this season we haven't had the pleasure of you in the hunting field," she continued. Morgan looked nervously at his feet and scratched his chin. Like his son Patrick, he wasn't given to the equine of the species, much preferring a rod in his hand to a hunter beneath him. "Yes, I admit things have been a little busy over in Harrogate. Simon, drinks for these two thirsty souls." Ah, Stanley, Morgan said, looking around. Colonel, how good of you to come. He extended his hand towards Stan Westbury, the auctioneer. Good evening and Merry Christmas to you and yours, Morgan. Have you met Janice? He replied. Stanley introduced his wife to their host, who was already beginning to feel overawed by the occasion. She smiled feebly during the introductions, and they continued on into the large reception room. The commodious lounge slowly began to fill. There was all manner and make of man. Ex-army officers jostled with colleagues from within the world of antiques. Farmers exchanged small talk. Shopkeepers and blacksmiths were explaining pig iron to the local vicar. When everyone appeared to have a drink, Daphne's thoughts turned to canapes. Fortunately, Patrick and his car party had just arrived, allowing Lorna to assist Hattie with the dispersal of food. Relieved of coats and with a drink in hand, the Strouds made their way through to the lounge. Much to her chagrin, Lorna was set upon immediately by Hattie and put to work. This was the bit Lorna hated, smiling sweetly and waiting on. Oh, don't fuss so, Hattie said to Lorna. We will knock this tucker out double quick. Before you know it, we can have a fag break. Hattie smoked like the proverbial chimney, whereas Lorna was only a social smoker, and then not in front of her mother, who, despite her husband's pipe, vehemently disapproved. I know, replied Lorna, tray in hand. Anyway, how are you, Hattie? I haven't seen much of you since... When was it? Last spring, she interjected. That's right, gosh, that long. How's London? London is London, she laughed. Hattie loved the urban sprawl and the buzz engendered by moving, living and having her being there. In contrast, the only time Lorna visited London was when the master organised a coach for the hunt to attend the countryside marches. The job is a grind, but advertising can be fun and you get to meet lots of interesting people. She secretly loved London because as much as she adored her family, it signified her independence from the Morgan dynasty and the Dales. Lorna was beginning to feel inadequate again and said, Come, let's get out of this kitchen and get on. Others will never get that bloody fag. As the two girls were leaving the kitchen holding trays laden with tasty morsels, they noticed the headlamps of a car pulling up outside. Someone's late, remarked Hattie, as they made their way back to the guests. Now, you sit there and be a good boy. Reith stared at his forlorn puppy, that despite the warmth of the grate had insisted on accompanying John to the party. If you have, there may be a morsel in it for you. God, look at the bloody time. I'm late. He patted his dog and got down from his Land Rover. The smart array of cars hadn't gone unnoticed as he made his way up to the portico of Thornbury Towers, and adjusting his tie, he pressed the bell. He stood nervously for what seemed an age before the huge oak doors began to swing open. Before John stood a gentleman, not dissimilar in attire, but who ushered him in. Do please come in. So glad you could make it. I don't believe we have met. Simon Jessup. He leant forward and proffered his hand. Good evening, John Reith replied. How do you do? Reith's late arrival meant that he was on his own in the foyer with a man he had never met in a house he didn't know. Here, let me take your coat and come through. Simon Jessup ushered John through to the rest of the party. Fortunately for John, the assembled party was well under steam, and therefore he did not have to make an entrance. Before long, Simon had arranged a gin and tonic for Reith and escorted him over to his mother, who was talking to the vicar, who was eulogising about this year's Christingle. Mother, sorry for interrupting you. Allow me to introduce John Reith. She turned to greet him, leaving the vicar slightly mid-air, hugging his sherry. Fixing John in her gaze, she said, How do you do, Daphne Morgan? I had learned that we had a new neighbour. I'm doing extremely well, and thank you, Daphne, for having me over so soon. John looked around the room as they chatted. He didn't recognise many of the characters, apart from the young man in the corner holding forth with a group of elderly ladies. "Well, this is us. You've already met Simon, my eldest. That's his brother over there in the corner talking to Mr. Blenheim. Patrick. He's in the same line of work as you, I understand." "Oh, he deals too," said Reith, trying to appear surprised. He knew full well about the Jessops, as did anyone else remotely connected to the world of antiques. John might not have made a dramatic entrance, but his arrival had not gone entirely without observation. Standing behind him was Hattie with a tray of food. "And here is our youngest, Harriet." Reith turned around to greet the young lady. She was certainly a pretty girl whose youth and vitality shone through the last vestiges of puppy fat. "Do help yourself," said Hattie Jessup, staring at John and talking in the stranger's features. Daphne knew that look in Hattie's face and quickly pointed to the fireplace, where, standing nearby, was her husband. "And there is Morgan, my husband, exchanging yarns with Major Fanshawe." Daphne gently took John's arm and said, "Do come over and say hello to Morgan. I know he would be pleased to make your acquaintance, but please, no antiques." She laughed. Reith found himself walking through numerous guests in the direction of the fireplace, which hosted a huge log fire in full flow. Also in full flow were Morgan, Major Fanshawe and Colonel Blenheim, who had just joined them. All three were partial to whisky, and on this occasion was no exception. "Gentlemen, allow me to introduce Mr. John Reith." The small assembly turned together to inspect the stranger. John in turn shook their hands severally and sipped his gin and tonic nervously. Morgan opened up the batting and said, "I understand you are in antiques also, John. Have I got that right?" "Yes, indeed, but please be assured I'm just starting out and I'm still finding my feet." "Well, we all had to start somewhere, didn't we?" said Morgan reassuringly, looking to the others for support. Blenheim didn't have a clue what he meant and continued to look Reith up and down through his monocle. He spotted John's regimental tie. "Good God! The 9th 12th!" John had been found out. His demise from the regiment had been pretty well publicised within military circles. He looked at his feet, and then back up at the colonel. However, to his relief, the colonel had left the army many years prior to him, and he was about to discover had left from an entirely different regiment. "Ah, that's cavalry, Wallers. Need to stick together, eh, what?" "Ha!" winked Blenheim. "Indubitably, Colonel. May I inquire as to your regiment, sir?" "Ah, of course you can, lad. Bengal Lancers, man and boy." Reith breathed a sigh of relief and thought to himself, not only a different regiment, but also a different continent. Thank God for that. The conversation continued largely around the subject of antiques, with Morgan and military matters with Colonel, until, to the continuing embarrassment of Reith, Major Fanshawe noticed the hole in John's jacket. "I say, dear boy, how long did you say you've been out of the mob? It would appear you have an infestation." "I didn't, but yes, you're right." John looked at the Major apologetically. Most of my wardrobe now appears to be little used, and I had hoped no one would have noticed." They all chuckled heartily, which relaxed John more effectively than the gin had up to now, and he thought he might actually be beginning to enjoy himself as a result of the good-natured banter. "No problem at all," interjected Blenheim with a perfectly rounded vowels in English. "Home should be like his clothes, and animals, they should rot nobly around one." Another huge guffaw ensued, out of all proportion to the quip. Not so loud as to entirely mask the faint noise of a whine from without, the Thornbury Tars. Would you excuse me, gentlemen?" said John suddenly, looking out of the leaded window into the courtyard. "Not at all," said Morgan merrily. "After all, you're here to meet the natives. Please do circulate." The small group nodded reverentially towards the newcomer and carried on with their conversation. Okay, Major," said Reith. "Good boy. I know you're cold, but You did insist on coming. All right, settle down. The puppy ignored Reith and showered him with unwanted wet licks. John had barely arrived at Thornbury Towers and was already exercised by society, but also realised that it would be rude to leave the party this early. There was an accepted time to arrive at a drinks party, and there was a time after which it would be churlish to remain. John looked at the puppy and thought he may need a comfort break. He opened the passenger door and allowed the dog to jump onto the ground. In order not to draw attention to themselves, Reith and Major made their way over the gravel car park and over to the brick archway. This led into what appeared by moonlight to be a walled kitchen garden. The full moon allowed John to see what was mostly later lawn, with a long and ancient greenhouse set into the rear wall. Major gaily explored the garden, while his master kept watch. "Hurry up," John said under his breath. "Let's get back into the warm. It's bloody freezing out here." He brought the puppy to heel, and they made their way back to the archway that stood by a large kitchen window, illuminated from within but with no apparent activity. Just as they approached, Major suddenly let out a growl that was so loud it stopped Reith in his tracks. Before he could gather his thoughts, he nearly jumped out of his skin as a black figure in eerie silence emerged from behind an acanthus bush. The apparition spoke. "What the?" Reith stood still and stared, rooted to the spot. "Not you again," the shadow continued. "The redoubtable Mr. Reith." John responded, noticing that the phantasm had transformed itself into the most delightful of spectres. Moving closer to the kitchen window, John saw plainly now the youthful form of Lorna Stroud. "Gosh, I nearly died then," he said with relief. He smiled uncomfortably as he wondered, why oh why do I always meet this young lady in the most awkward of circumstances? He looked at her and said, "Oh, I was just sorting out Major. He has a low boredom threshold." "Don't all men," Lorna said, throwing her head back and taking another drag from the cigarette she had just lit. She continued to look at John Reith, sizing him up, enjoying his discomfort. John looked at her back and asked, "And what is your excuse?" At first she didn't understand what he meant. "Sorry?" Then the penny dropped. She laughed in a way that was quite captivating to John. A confident, teasing laugh that, despite being genuine, was perfectly controlled. "Oh, I'm having a crafty fag." John stood side by side next to her and, looking up to the moon, asked, "Why crafty?" She explained that despite her years, her mother and father did not approve. An act of monumental hypocrisy, she continued, as her father smoked a pipe, which for some reason he felt did not count as smoking. "Care to join me, Mr. Reith?" she asked, holding out the packet. He refused politely. "It's John, please, and may I call you Lorna?" "By all means, John." "How do you know my name?" "Oh, I caught the newspaper report concerning your recent victory at Fellside Point to Point. Quite impressed, I must say." "Impressed? What, that a woman won it? Or impressed that I did?" Impressed that anybody should win it," he volunteered cagily. "I see, John," she replied, looking him up and down. "And do you ride?" John fixed her with his stare. A little." Lorna could never understand what it was with men. Do they always prefer cars to horses? "Oh, right. A fair bit," said Lorna dismissively. "Well, I don't know about you, Mr. Reith. John, but I'm frozen." She smiled enigmatically at him and then disappeared up the kitchen steps and back in through the back door. John Reith was about to follow until he remembered Major, who, bored of their conversation, had allowed himself to wander off again. The party was beginning to thin out as the assembled company severally gave their leave. John had continued to circulate freely throughout the evening, allowing most of the guests to vet him. Finally he was in the large hallway, being assisted with his coat, a well-worn barber. John assumed he'd made good his escape when Colonel Blenheim appeared out of nowhere. "I say, Reith," he boomed. "I was meaning to ask you, are you still mounted?" John chuckled inwardly as he thought of his earlier garden rendezvous with Lorna. "Not at all, Colonel. I'm afraid I must confess I've been rather heedless of late, and rather taken up with work." Perhaps now was not the time to announce that he was a gentleman of reduced circumstances. "No matter, my old sport. I tell you what, you're a dealer. Well, I have a deal for you. Agnes and I have been meaning to clear out the attic for some time. If you could see your way clear to giving it the once over, I would be most obliged and more than happy to supply a nag for Wednesday's meet." Reeves couldn't believe his good fortune. "Have I got this right?" he thought to himself. "Back in the saddle by next Wednesday, and maybe some profit to boot? There is a God in heaven." John looked at the Colonel, attempting to disguise his glee. "I'd be more than happy, sir, to oblige, and would be most grateful for the opportunity for a day in the field." "Well then, that's settled then. Can you come around, say, Friday?" "It will be my pleasure, Colonel," John said reverentially. With that, they shook hands, and John kissed Blenheim's lady wife lightly on the cheek, and the departing group made their way to their respective vehicles. John got into his Land Rover, where Major was sitting patiently on a tartan rug on the passenger seat. The great thing about a Land Rover, thought Reeve, was that whatever its age or condition in the country, it was never despised. He sat for a while and allowed the other cars to sweep out of the drive ahead of him. John eventually followed. "Major, we've bloody well cracked it. Come on, let's get back to Hunter's Moon and have a proper drink." And that's the end of that chapter. The camera died. Sorry, it was all a bit... I haven't quite edited that one, so the syntax was a bit all over the place in parts. But anyway, and I'd not read it through because I've not been feeling that great today. I've been a bit fatigued. But I thought I ought to produce something today. But I need to sort of polish that one a little bit, and it's a long chapter too. So there we shall leave it for today. I think I've been going on long enough. I must have been because the camera stopped. So you will notice that a bit where I kind of dissolve from one bit into another. And I hope you're all well, and maybe see you tomorrow. Maybe something might have happened here tomorrow. I have no idea. But let's hope this glorious weather continues. Maybe get a little bit more rain. Monty's doing well. Yeah, got a hell of a voracious appetite on him. Anyway, that's me over and out for today. Father John signing out, going back to the caravan. But I think I might allow myself some high tea. All the best.